Grady Lewis cleaned the floors that legends walked on, and they never knew his name. Shaquille O'Neal. Never forgot him. But when Grady vanishes without a trace, Shaq uncovers a truth the league buried for decades. One contract, one voice, one man erased for standing up. Now the spotlight turns, and what it reveals could bring an empire to its knees. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. For 20 straight seasons, the hardwood gleamed under his watch. The towels never ran out. The benches were spotless. Laces were never tangled. Jerseys folded like respect itself. Grady Lewis was the kind of man arenas were built on. Not for the slam dunks, not for the sold-out noise, but for the silence between games. The part no one saw. The part that mattered more than the spotlight. He came in through the back gate, long before sunrise, and left long after midnight. Never a complaint. Never late. His hands knew the floor's grooves, better than most players knew their own shooting percentages. And yet, you'd be hard-pressed to find his name on any of the plaques that lined the walls of the South District Arena. But Shaquille O'Neal remembered. Not Big Shaq the icon. Not Shaq the businessman. Not the celebrity. Shaquille the 19-year-old rookie with a raw hook shot, and more nerves than swagger. That version of him. Remembered the old man who used to slip an extra towel into his locker after hard games, who once taped a note to his shoe, "You got more than bounce. You got heart. Use both." Shaq never forgot that. Most didn't even see Grady. He moved through the place like part of the concrete. Coaches walked past him. PR teams smiled tight, then forgot. Security nodded, then ignored. But Shaq made it a habit to stop. A quick shoulder squeeze. "Are you good, OG?" Something simple. Grady never said much back, just a slow nod, a low chuckle, maybe a line like "Stay loose, big fella." It was a friendship built on mutual respect, forged without the need for many words. On a bright Thursday afternoon in early spring, the kind of afternoon when the city hums just a bit lighter, Shaq walked into the locker room and noticed something was wrong. Grady's stool was empty. The cleaning cart was pushed awkwardly into the corner, supplies half used. No music from the tiny Bluetooth speaker Grady kept clipped to his belt. No faint whistle of an old blues tune from the back hallway. No familiar smell of lemon cleaner and menthol rub. "Where's Grady?" Shaq asked the young intern wiping down a bench. The kid shrugged. I think he was let go last week. Budget cuts or something. Not really sure." Shaq's jaw tightened. Let go? Just like that? No announcement. No farewell. 20 years, and they couldn't even put up a flyer by the vending machines. He didn't say anything then. Just left. But something began to simmer under his chest. Not anger yet, but the slow, cold press of confusion. Shaq had built a life on instincts, both on and off the court. And right now those instincts were screaming. Back in his SUV, he called the arena manager. Voicemail. Then he called an old teammate, who still had pull in the front office. "Yeah," the guy muttered. "Grady's out, said they had to make room for some new analytics crew, or something." "It's above my pay grade, man." Shaq hung up. Above pay grade. Below dignity. That night, he paced his home gym, eyes scanning the rows of memorabilia that lined the walls. Rings, jerseys, magazine covers, all of it earned, all of it shining. Yet somehow, all of it now felt just a little off, like something had gone sour behind the glass. He tried calling Grady. No answer. Again. Then again. Nothing. Not even voicemail this time. Just a hollow line. The next day, Shaq pulled up to Grady's old apartment complex on the west side. The landlord, an elderly woman with a folded newspaper under one arm, stepped out onto the porch. "You looking for Mr. Lewis?" Shaq nodded. She sighed. "Didn't pay rent last 2 months. Said he'd get it to me." Quiet man, packed up middle of the night, left no forwarding address. Shaq leaned against the railing. Silent. She handed him a worn-out key. Only thing he left behind. Locker key. "I think he worked at some arena." He stared at it. It wasn't an arena key. It was for a city shelter. It took another day of calls. Some favors pulled, and one unexpected conversation with a volunteer named Russell. A retired pastor who recognized Shaq immediately, but didn't fanboy. That alone earned Shaq's trust. "He's here," Russell said, lowering his voice. "Second floor. Bed by the window. Came in last week. Said he was between places. Didn't say much else." Shaq followed him up. The shelter smelled like old books and disinfectant. A fan clicked rhythmically somewhere overhead. On the second floor, a row of metal-framed beds lined the walls. Only a few were occupied, some by men pretending to sleep, others just staring blankly. Grady sat at the far end, hunched over, hands folded on his lap like a man in church. He was thinner, his shirt hung looser around his shoulders. His hair, once neatly faded, was now streaked with gray and curling wild behind his ears. He didn't look up until Shaq's shadow fell over him. There was a pause, a long one. Then Grady let out the faintest chuckle. Didn't think you'd find me. Shaq sat on the edge of the neighboring bed, careful not to say too much too fast. You okay, old man? Grady rubbed his temples. I'm breathing. That's a start. Shaq wanted to yell at someone, anyone, but kept his voice calm. Why didn't you call me? Grady just shook his head, eyes unfocused. Didn't seem right. You're a busy man. World don't stop for an old locker room ghost. A locker room ghost. That phrase stayed with Shaq long after he left the shelter. He went home, but the silence in his mansion pressed heavy. That night he scrolled through old footage on his laptop, game day videos, behind-the-scenes reels, and there he was. Again and again. Grady just off frame, wiping sweat, handing out water bottles, giving a thumbs up from behind a crate. Invisible. But always there. Shaq knew what he had to do. He called his manager, told him to cancel everything for the next week. When the man protested, Shaq said simply, I owe someone more than a trophy. The next morning, Shaq was back at the shelter with a plan. A private doctor would visit. Clothes were being sent. A furnished apartment, modest but dignified, was being arranged. Everything quiet, no cameras, no fanfare. Grady resisted at first. Pride clawed at him. But Shaq looked him square in the eyes and said, You never asked for anything. That's why I need you to take this. That night, as they sat by the small window in the shelter's common room, watching the amber glow of the city outside, Grady finally spoke what he hadn't for decades. I used to think if I just worked hard, someone would notice, that maybe I mattered more than a mop and a tag on my shirt. Shaq didn't interrupt. Let the man bleed out the truth in peace. I watched kids come in with nothing and leave with millions. And I was proud, never bitter. But when they cut me loose like that, Grady's voice caught. It felt like I was trash on the court after the buzzer, just swept away. The silence afterward was heavier than the city skyline. Shaq stared out into the night. No one sweeps you away, Grady. Not on my watch. And somewhere between that vow and the blinking lights beyond the window pane, the weight began to shift. Not disappear, but shift. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had noticed the man in the shadows, and he wasn't going to let him vanish again. Shaq nodded. He was here 2 nights ago. Just sat there. Didn't ask for anything. Left with a guy in a shelter van. Said his chest hurt. Shaq's breath hitched. Which shelter? The man pointed west. New Hope Center, 2nd and Benton. 15 minutes later, Shaq stood in a cramped, low-lit lobby that smelled like stale coffee and bleach. A heavy-set volunteer behind the desk blinked up at him like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. He introduced himself quietly, respectful. She paged someone named Russell. A few minutes later, Russell appeared. Tall, tired eyes, gray beard, but a kind voice. Mr. O'Neal, he said, offering a warm but firm handshake. We didn't think anyone would come for him. Where is he? Shaq asked. Russell led him upstairs. It was quiet up there, the kind of quiet that pressed in around you, thick and still. The second floor was lined with twin beds, mismatched sheets, personal belongings stacked in plastic bins. Some men slept with their coats on. Others watched silently as Shaq passed, too proud to ask, too aware of where they were. Russell stopped at a bed near the far window. He's sleeping now. Been in and out. Said he had chest pain. Exhaustion. We've got a nurse on rotation. But he refuses the hospital. Shaq looked down at the man in the bed, not the Grady he remembered. This man looked older by 10 years. Hollowed. Fragile. But the shape of his hands was the same. Still strong, even in rest. Shaq sat beside the bed and waited, his frame too big for the plastic chair, but he didn't he just sat. After nearly 20 minutes, Grady stirred. His eyes fluttered, then focused. You're real? He whispered. Shaq nodded. You didn't answer your phone. Grady gave a soft, dry laugh. Didn't have one to answer. There was silence between them, but not the kind that needed breaking. Grady looked out the window. Didn't think you'd come looking. Shaq leaned forward. Why didn't you call me? Grady exhaled through his nose. Felt like the world had moved on. Like maybe I wasn't part of it anymore. Shaq shook his head slowly. That's not how this works. The old man studied him. You're different, Shaq. Always were. You looked people in the eyes, even the ones no one else saw. Shaq didn't speak. The weight of the moment said more than words could. Grady's voice cracked. I didn't want pity. It's not pity, Shaq replied. It's respect. Russell returned quietly with a glass of water, then motioned to Shaq. You can stay, if you want, but he needs rest. Shaq stood, placed a hand on Grady's shoulder. I'm not leaving you here. Grady didn't protest, didn't argue. He just nodded once, slow and grateful, as if part of him still couldn't believe someone had come back for him. As Shaq walked back down to the lobby, the weight in his chest shifted, not lighter, not yet, but more focused. He had found Grady. But the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. You can spend your life lifting others, and still get crushed by silence. That thought echoed in Shaq's mind, as he watched Grady Lewis lying motionless in the hospital bed, pale against the crisp white sheets, IV line trailing from his arm, an oxygen clip pinched to his finger. The clinic was private, quiet and clean, the kind of place you had to know someone, or pay steep to get into. Shaq had made the call without hesitation, his name alone unlocking doors Grady never would have been allowed to touch. The attending physician gave a report that was more damning in tone than words. Dehydration, borderline pneumonia, heart strain, stress markers through the roof. No family contact, no insurance, no known medical history in the last decade. Honestly, the doctor had said, he got here just in time. Shaq didn't respond. He just sat, silent, watching, his massive hands clasped together. This wasn't about saving face. This wasn't even about charity. It was about a man who'd spent his life in the margins of other people's victories. And when his world fell apart, no one thought to check the box score. Grady hadn't said much since being admitted. Even with fluids pumping and warmth restored to his skin, he looked broken. Not just sick, broken in a way Shaq hadn't seen in a man before, like something had been quietly corroding inside for years, until there was nothing left but dust and duty. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was loaded. Grady would glance out the window, sometimes at the TV without sound, but mostly at nothing. Shaq didn't push. He knew better. You don't rush a man back from the kind of pain that no X-ray can diagnose. By the third day, Grady finally spoke more than a sentence. You know, I had a scholarship once. Shaq looked over from the chair. Grady didn't make eye contact, just kept staring at the window. Ball handler. D1 school. Quick hands, good IQ. Coach said I had a shot at the league. Then one day, bad landing. ACL went like a rope snap. No rehab program. No agents. No second looks. He paused, lips tightening. I went from a jersey to a mop in 5 years. Shaq didn't speak. Grady's voice was calm, but it cut deeper than a scream. Wasn't bitter at first. Figured I'd stay close to the game. Maybe earn my way back somehow. But years passed. Players came and went. Some remembered my name. Most didn't. That's fine. Wasn't about the glory. Another pause. But then one day, I looked around and realized I was still there, still wiping up sweat while kids with less fire made millions. Shaq felt the anger rising. But it wasn't for Grady. It was for the machine. The system that chewed up the invisible, the trainers, the bus drivers, the equipment guys, the ones who made the whole damn thing run. No cameras, no contracts, just loyalty, often unpaid. He made a call to one of his longtime PR managers, Devon Chase, the next morning, told him to start asking questions, why Grady was terminated, who approved it, what severance was offered. Devon tried to downplay it. Shaq, look, I get the emotion, but getting tangled in HR firings from the league. This doesn't look good, especially with you trying to secure that media deal with Apex Sports. These kinds of stories muddy the image. The public loves you. Don't make this political. Shaq cut him off. It already is. I'm not backing down. Another day passed. Then 2. He didn't go home. He slept in the lounge chair, ordered food for the nurses, and kept his schedule clear. Every morning he brought in a fresh set of sweats for Grady. Every evening, he updated the doctors on Grady's small improvements. On the 4th night, A younger nurse told Shaq she remembered Grady from her uncle's days working security at the arena. He used to give us little paper footballs during long shifts, she smiled. Didn't know his name until now. That hit Shaq hard. Even the people he helped didn't know his name. By the end of the week, Grady started sitting up, eating again. He was still weak, but the fog behind his eyes had begun to lift. That's when Shaq asked him something simple, something that had been haunting him. Why didn't you tell me you needed help? Grady took a long breath. Pride's a funny thing. It sticks around even when nothing else does. I thought maybe I was meant to fade out quiet, like background noise. Shaq stood, pacing slightly. You gave your whole life to helping others shine. That doesn't make you background noise. That makes you the damn power switch. Grady let out a half laugh, half sigh. But the switch gets flipped, Shaq, and people don't think twice about who's behind it. I did my job. That's all I ever wanted. But I guess I thought maybe someone would notice when I wasn't there. That silence returned again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was honest. Shaq left that night more fired up than he'd felt in years. Not the kind of adrenaline he used to feel before a game. This was deeper. It was fuel, and it needed direction. He met with Devin the next day, in person. Devin came in hot, folder in hand, ready to make a case about optics, brand partnerships, financial backlash. Shaq sat him down and said, "This isn't about saving face. It's about saving truth." Devin argued, told him to post something vague and charitable, maybe a caption about kindness, a filtered photo of him and Grady from years back. Shaq refused. "I'm not here to be liked," he said. "I'm here to be right." The tension hit the room like a storm front. Devin closed the folder. "Then you better be ready. Because when you push on a system that's designed to erase people like Grady, it pushes back." Shaq leaned in, voice low. "Let it." That night he returned to the clinic. Grady was stronger now, color back in his face, appetite returning. Shaq brought him a bag with clean clothes, and a worn photo frame, an old team photo from 15 years ago. Grady in the background, half smiling, half shielded. "I found this in storage," Shaq said. Grady stared at it for a long time. "You were always there," Shaq added, "even when no one noticed." And then for the first time, Grady's eyes welled up. No grand outburst, no movie scene theatrics, just one trembling breath, one soft line that cracked something open. "You were the only one who ever saw me." The weight of that truth hung between them. Heavy, final, undeniable. And in that moment, Shaq understood what this fight really was. It wasn't about image. It was about memory, dignity, legacy. It was about the millions of people like Grady Lewis, whose lives were built on service, whose stories were paved over, whose names faded too soon. And Shaquille O'Neal wasn't going to let that continue. Not anymore. The receptionist looked up from behind a desk with a confused stare. You're Shaquille O'Neal?" Dana emerged from a back room moments later, holding a coffee mug that said "Fact First." She looked older than he remembered from interviews, sharper around the eyes, thinner, as if the world had tried to grind her down and failed. She approached, guarded. "You looking to sue me?" Shaq chuckled. "I'm looking to talk." They stepped into a side room. No entourage, no assistants, just the two of them. "I read your piece years ago," Shaq said. "The one about the staffers. The ones no one sees." Dana's eyebrow lifted. "You're about 8 years too late to care." "I cared then," Shaq replied, "but I didn't understand it. Now I do." He told her about Grady, not the PR version, the real one. He painted the picture. 20 years of loyalty, no recognition, no severance, left in a shelter while the stadium floor he once polished gleamed under $1 million endorsements. Dana didn't interrupt. She just listened. Her fingers eventually moved to her notepad, scribbling thoughts. But mostly she looked him in the eye. When he finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "You're ready to burn a few bridges for this?" "I already lit the match." Dana nodded. "Good. Because they won't just ignore you. They'll try to erase you from this story, the way they erased the rest of them. Then we don't give them the chance." They agreed to meet again in 2 days. Shaq would provide names, leads, contacts. Dana would dig carefully, quietly, until it was ready. Not a puff piece, not a celebrity redemption story, but a truth bomb, one they would drop on their terms. As Shaq walked back to his SUV, his phone buzzed again. Another endorsement partner asking for reassurance that he wasn't getting political. He ignored it. This wasn't politics. This was justice. The kind you couldn't buy. And as the sun dipped low behind the downtown skyline, casting long shadows across the city that had built him, Shaquille O'Neal felt the guilt in his chest settle into something steadier. Purpose. He had money. Sure. But that wasn't the point anymore. This time, he had something more powerful. A story they couldn't bury. The locker room was clean. The books weren't. That thought hung like smoke in Shaq's mind, as he sat at the long conference table, inside Dana Carlisle's modest office. Stacks of scanned personnel records and internal memos spread before him like the pages of a lost gospel. The deeper they went into the data, the uglier it became. Patterns of neglect disguised as policy, loyalty punished as redundancy, names vanishing off payroll with the cold precision of an algorithm. This wasn't mismanagement. This was something much worse. Shaq had always known the league was a business. Polished, strategic, and unapologetically profit-driven. But now he was seeing behind the mask. This wasn't just about Grady anymore. This was about all the Gradys. Men and women who gave their whole lives to teams they couldn't afford to root for, who scrubbed the sweat, packed the uniforms, iced the injuries, and were discarded when they got too old, too slow, or too noticeable. Dana sat across from him, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, her eyes flicking between spreadsheets like a detective cracking a cold case. She moved with the sharp focus of someone who'd been shut out before and wasn't going to miss her second shot. "Look here," she said, pointing to a column labeled Staff Transition Phase 3. "This is from 5 years ago. You'll see 15 staffers let go within a 6-month window. 14 of them were black. 11 were over the age of 45, and none of them were given exit interviews or post-employment assistance." Shaq leaned in, jaw tightening. "That's a pattern." Dana nodded. "And patterns are what make it provable. This wasn't random. It was strategic. They called it streamlining. But really it was about phasing out anyone who didn't fit the new branding culture." She clicked to another folder on her laptop, one labeled Grady Lewis. Inside were 2 documents. One was a complaint form, half-filled, signed by Grady, dated 12 years ago. The subject line read, "Requesting review, racial bias in staffing promotions." The other document was a scanned email from a senior executive. "Ray Lewis complaint. Shred and redirect. Demotion to laundry rotation next month. Keep off record." Shaq's hand curled into a fist, then uncurled slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He just stared at the screen, the weight of that moment pressing down on him like 100 missed free throws. "They didn't just forget him," Shaq said, voice graveled. "They buried him." Dana closed the laptop gently, careful not to disrupt the silence that followed. "This is what happens when people like Grady speak up. They don't fire you out loud. They erase you slow. They choke the oxygen until no one remembers you were even there." Shaq exhaled through his nose, the gears turning. "And nobody stopped it, not even me." Dana didn't offer comfort. She didn't need to. She knew Shaq wasn't the kind of man looking for absolution. He was looking for accountability. The next few days blurred into meetings and phone calls. Digging through years of HR records and digital footprints, Dana contacted former staff anonymously, offering voice modulation and confidentiality. One after another they confirmed the same story. Subtle exclusions, lack of upward mobility, whispers of being too old school, or not fitting the team image. One staffer, a woman named Loretta Caldwell, broke down during a Zoom call. "I gave them 28 years, she said. 2 kids put through school on that paycheck. Never missed a day. Then they replaced me with someone half my age, who didn't even know how to tape a knee. Said I wasn't modern enough. That's what they called it." Dana recorded every word. Shaq listened to every interview, took notes, remembered every name. At night, he sat beside Grady at the clinic, who was steadily recovering, eating full meals, laughing again, in small bursts, the light returning to his eyes. Shaq didn't tell him what they'd uncovered. Not yet. He wanted to make sure Grady had the strength for what was coming. But one night, Grady turned to him and said, "You've been moving like a man chasing ghosts." Shaq nodded slowly. "I found one, and he led me to more." Grady didn't ask what that meant. He just looked back out the window with the quiet calm of someone who already knew. Back at Dana's office, they finally reached a point of no return. The evidence was strong, the patterns undeniable, the stories heartbreaking, All that was left was deciding how to drop it. Dana suggested a documentary-style release, interviews, testimonials, internal documents, all laid out like a case file for the public. But Shaq had another idea. They use the spotlight to erase people, he said. So we'll use it to bring them back. He proposed a televised special. Not flashy, not performative, just real stories, told straight, anchored by truth. His name would be the hook, but the voices would belong to the ones no one had heard from. He would executive produce it. Dana would write and direct it. She blinked. That kind of exposure. They'll come for both of us. Shaq smiled. Let them try. They began pre-production within a week. Shaq funded the entire project himself. No ads, no sponsors, just truth. Dana contacted a few editors she trusted. Shaq reached out to a few players still inside the system, not asking them to speak, just asking them to watch when the time came. On the final day of prep, Dana brought in a box. Inside were physical documents recovered from a former league staffer. Among them, a printed memo showing Grady's name on a do not promote list circulated among team executives. Shaq held it in his hands like it was a piece of bone. They really tried to silence him, Dana whispered. Shaq stood up, staring out the window, his reflection bouncing back at him against the late afternoon sun. Not anymore, he said. I'm done playing nice. Dana looked over. You sure you want to be the face of this? Shaq nodded. I've been the face of sneakers, fast food, talk shows. Time to be the face of something real. That night, as he sat beside Grady for what had become their nightly ritual, Shaq finally told him everything. The documents, the stories, the names, the plan. Grady listened without blinking. When Shaq finished, he asked, You okay if we make this public? Grady took a moment, then said something Shaq would never forget. If the truth helps even one man stay seen, then let them all see me now. Shaq reached over and gripped his hand. The next morning, filming began, and the lights that once ignored the truth finally turned toward it. But peace, in this world, never lasted long. By noon, the blowback had begun. The league issued a generic statement. We are deeply committed to diversity and inclusion, and are reviewing the claims presented. Standard PR damage control. No names, no ownership, no change. By 2, Shaq's phone lit up with alerts, headlines spiraling, hashtags trending. Some hailed him as a truth teller, a conscience for the game. But others sharpened their knives. A popular sports network ran a panel titled Shaq's War, Noble Crusade, or Career Suicide. Clips spliced together moments from his career that painted him as loud, difficult, unpredictable. One host casually remarked, Is this really about injustice? Or is this a millionaire trying to stay relevant? By sundown, it got worse. An anonymous post leaked on a major forum, claiming Grady Lewis had a history of insubordination, had clashed with players, and once abandoned his duties during a playoff run. No sources, no documentation, just Shaq's team tried to contain it. His longtime manager Devin called, voice tense. You need to get out in front of this. Clarify your intent. Reaffirm your commitment to the league. We've got 5 endorsement deals, pausing campaigns until you say something. Shaq leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the sky thick with dusk. No, he said. Devin sighed hard through the receiver. Look, I get it. All right, you're doing this from a good place. But this is bigger than one man. You're risking your empire over an old janitor nobody remembers. Shaq's voice dropped. His name is Grady, and I remember him. There was a long pause. Then quietly, Devin said, They're going to come for you. Shaq nodded to no one. Let them. He ended the call. An hour later, social media flooded with commentary. Former teammates, the same ones who used to slap Grady's back and call him aunt after games, now distanced themselves. One posted a long-winded thread about nuance and how narratives get distorted in the age of outrage. Another appeared on a podcast vaguely implying Shaq was stirring old pots. No one dared say Grady's name, not anymore. And still the smear campaign grew. A sports columnist released a piece citing team insiders who described Grady as a disgruntled ex-employee who misunderstood his role. They used phrases like old guard, resistant to change, and not a cultural fit. The article ended with the insinuation that Shaq had been emotionally manipulated. That night, Shaq went to the clinic. Grady was sitting up, a soft jazz station humming low in the background. He looked better, color in his face, strength in his grip, but the weariness in his eyes was unmistakable. He'd seen the headlines. He didn't need to ask. "I never asked you to fight this," he said, voice almost too quiet to hear. Shaq sat beside him, folding his massive arms. "That's why I have to." Grady exhaled, rubbing the heel of his palm against one eye. "I'm not worth what you're losing." "You're worth more," Shaq said. They just never measured it right. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, rain began to fall, soft, slow tapping like a metronome against the glass. The next morning, Shaq woke to find his name on a trending list again. But this time, not for the special. A video had been leaked. A grainy cell phone recording. It showed Shaq behind the scenes at a charity event. From 3 nights ago, standing off to the side in conversation with a league executive. A powerful man in a tailored suit, and a team pin on his lapel. The executive's voice was clipped, irritated. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We're not running a charity. These people were lucky to have jobs in the first place." Shaq's response wasn't loud, but it was clear. They weren't lucky. They were loyal. And you paid them with silence. The video ended there. No context, no spin, just that exchange. And it exploded. The public reacted fast. The truth unfiltered, uncut, hit harder than any press release ever could. The executive's name was identified within hours. His history surfaced. So did reports of previous discrimination claims. The league released a new statement, tighter this time. They announced an independent investigation into historical staffing practices. A vague promise of reform. Dana called that afternoon, voice measured but burning underneath. "They're scared now," she said. "That video? That wasn't supposed to get out. But it gave the story legs. We've got former employees coming forward now, offering interviews. Some of them haven't spoken in years." Shaq nodded, jaw set. "Good. Let's make sure they're heard." But not everyone was rallying. 3 of Shaq's major sponsors pulled ad placements. One issued a public statement about evaluating our relationship. Another quietly removed his image from their homepage. Devin called again, less panicked this time. "Just tired. I'm gonna be straight with you. You keep going, you're gonna lose millions. And they won't stop at you. They'll go after Dana. They'll dig up whatever they can. You ready for that?" Shaq didn't even pause. This was never about the money. And for once Devin had nothing to say. Shaq spent that evening, walking the empty concourse of the South District Arena, the place where it all started. It was after hours, dark, quiet. The air still carried the faint scent of sweat and floor polish. He paused outside the locker room. There, on the wall was a framed photo of a championship roster. Grady wasn't in it. Shaq stared at the space just to the edge of the frame, where he remembered Grady always standing, out of shot, holding towels or nodding behind the bench. He whispered, "They erased you, but I won't." Back at the clinic, Grady watched the leaked video on a nurse's tablet. He didn't smile, but his eyes shone just a little brighter. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly when Shaq returned. "I didn't," Shaq replied. "But now I can't stop." The storm had broken, and Shaq wasn't running from it. He was walking right through it, carrying not just Grady's story, but all the ones like his. The ones buried under clean floors and championship banners. The ones hidden behind the stats and the sponsorships. The ones they never wanted anyone to remember. Now, the whole world would. They built a legend off his back. Now the lights are pointed the other way. The invitation came sealed in a white envelope, delivered not by courier, but hand to hand through a league representative with a plastic smile. Inside, a summons to a confidential executive roundtable, hosted at league headquarters. The language was clean, corporate phrases like collaborative dialogue, integrity alignment, and long-term brand stewardship peppered the print. Shaq knew what it really meant. They were circling the wagons. That morning, he dressed carefully. No suit, no stylists. He walked into the downtown building in a dark hoodie, black jeans, and sneakers, the same way he might have entered as a rookie back in '92. But now, he wasn't here to perform. He was here to stand. Inside, a dozen men in pressed suits sat around a long conference table, under warm lighting that couldn't hide the coldness in the room. There were no cameras, no microphones, no official record. The commissioner was there. So were 2 team owners, heads of PR, legal counsel, even a brand consultant. Shaq didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands at his sides. Unblinking, one of the executives started soft. "Shaquille, We appreciate your passion. But this has caused quite a ripple. Dina Carlisle's article. It's not just viral. It's incendiary. Another chimed in, polite, but clipped. You've painted the league in a dangerous light. And while we support transparency, the framing here. Shaq cut in. Calm. Measured. It's not a frame, it's a mirror. A silence fell, thicker than the carpet beneath them. Then the commissioner spoke. You're one of us, Shaq. Always have been. And we want to handle this, internally. Quietly. We're prepared to offer reparations to affected parties. We'd like you to sign on as an ambassador to a new equity initiative we're launching. Shaq gave a small smile. It wasn't friendly. Translation: slap my face on a poster while you keep burying the truth. One of the owners leaned forward, voice low. Be careful. You're standing on the shoulders of a legacy we built together. Shaq's stare didn't flinch. No, you built it on people like Grady. You just never wrote their names down. He turned and walked out without another word, the tension snapping behind him like a broken shoelace. Across town, Dana hit publish. The full exposé, invisible hands, the people who built the game, went live on an independent media site. Within minutes, it spread like brushfire. Not just in sports circles. Everywhere. Mainstream outlets picked it up. News anchors quoted it. Athletes reposted it. Staffers came forward with their own stories. The piece was brutally factual. Names, documents, emails, timeline charts showing termination waves, testimonies from people who had never spoken on record before. Public reaction came in waves. Some flooded in with praise. Retired players thanking Shaq for speaking truth. Families of dismissed staff posting photos and memories. A trending hashtag emerged. Done say their names too. But backlash had its corner too. Online trolls called it performative. Pundits said it was divisive. Why drag the past into the present? One anchor asked, face tight with performative concern. Isn't the game supposed to unite us? Shaq didn't respond to any of it. He was too busy watching the real ripples. The shelter where Grady had stayed, the same one Shaq first found him in, suddenly found itself overwhelmed with support. Checks arrived in the mail, addressed simply, for Grady. A fundraiser launched in his name reached 6 figures in under 4, but all of it came just as Grady's health took another turn. Shaq got the call late at night. The clinic's voice was steady but urgent. Chest complications. Shallow breathing. They were moving him to intensive care. When Shaq arrived, the machines were already in place. Tubes. Beeps. A quiet murmur of nurses moving quickly, softly. Grady was awake, but only barely. His eyes opened, then drifted shut in rhythm with the monitors. Shaq sat beside him, head bowed. He didn't say much, just held the man's hand, the same hand that once pulled sweat-soaked jerseys from lockers, without complaint. The same hand that gave a 19-year-old rookie a pat on the back, after a brutal loss, and said, "You'll bounce back, big fella." Now it was that rookie, who had to hold the line. The next day, as Dana coordinated interviews and fielded media requests, Shaq stepped outside the clinic for the first time in hours. The sky was gray, misty. The world felt suspended. Every second slow. That's when the stranger approached. An older man. Slender. Tan jacket. Carried a satchel like a college professor. He looked familiar, but Shaq couldn't place him. "Mr. O'Neal?" the man asked. Shaq nodded. "Yeah." The man extended his hand. "Name's Warren Dent. I coached Grady in college, before the injury." Shaq blinked. He talked about you once. Said you were the first one who believed in him." Warren smiled faintly. He had fire. Quiet fire, but it burned real. He pulled an envelope from his satchel. Thick, worn, sealed with tape. "I kept this for a long time," Warren said. "Didn't know if it mattered. But after everything that's come out, I think it does now." Shaq took it carefully. "What is it?" "Proof," Warren said simply, "of what they took from him." Shaq stared at the envelope. It felt heavy, not in weight but in meaning. He looked up, but Warren was already walking away, disappearing into the drifting fog like a man with his final task complete. Back inside, he returned to Grady's side. The envelope stayed unopened in his hand. But something had changed. The story wasn't just personal anymore. It was explosive, and the fuse had just been lit. Buried deep in the past was the proof no one wanted found. Shaq sat alone in the dim clinic hallway, the envelope resting on his knees like something sacred. It was thick, yellowed at the edges, the tape brittle. The name Grady Lewis scrawled across the front in black ink. Warren Dent, the former coach who'd handed it off like a final confession, hadn't given a timeline, only a warning. Whatever's in there, it was meant to stay hidden. Shaq stared at it for a long time, as if opening it might unravel more than just pages. It might rewrite everything he thought he knew, about Grady, about the league, about the myth of fairness in a game built on the backs of men like him. Finally, with a deep breath, Shaq peeled the tape back and slid the contents free. The first page hit hard, an official league contract offer. The year, 1986. A minor league affiliate deal with upward mobility written in. Salary, housing stipend, training clause. It wasn't a lottery ticket, but it was a door, and Grady had been standing right in front of it. Shaq flipped to the second document. It was a letter, unsigned, but clearly internal, marked confidential. The tone was cold, clinical. It referenced a meeting where Grady voiced concerns about a discriminatory team housing policy that placed white players in sponsored hotels while black players were directed to stay with host families or find their own accommodation. He had filed a formal objection citing unfair treatment and implicit segregation. The final paragraph ended with quiet violence. Recommend contract withdrawal. Effective immediately. Lewis demonstrates an oppositional attitude and lack of alignment with organizational priorities. Do not initiate further communication. Shaq felt his stomach twist. He flipped through the rest of the file. Clippings, memos, a rejection letter from another team, vague in its wording but echoing the same tone. Not a cultural fit. They hadn't just turned him down. They'd locked the door behind him. And then, in an insult that now read like strategy, someone had offered Grady a janitorial position at the team facility. A footnote career. A way to tuck him behind the curtain and pretend he never knocked on the front door. Shaq leaned back in the chair, hands folded behind his head, the weight of it all crushing. Grady had never said a word, not once, not through 20 years of towel folds, tape rolls, and silent service. He'd never shared that he was almost one of them, that he had stood at the edge of the spotlight and been shoved off. And now Shaq understood why the old man always carried himself with such dignity, even when no one else saw it. Because Grady had once dared to speak up. He had once believed he could change something. And for that they had erased him, but not anymore. Shaq took the file straight to Dana Carlisle. She read it with the measured intensity of someone who'd seen too many buried truths. This, she said softly, is the keystone. The whole thing comes into focus now. They scanned every page, cataloged every line, and included it in the next release. The ones they silenced. A follow-up article that laid bare the pattern. Grady wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He had been intentionally pushed out for daring to challenge a system designed to favor quiet obedience over inconvenient truth. The public response was immediate and visceral. Talk shows debated it. Athletes began speaking up, some reluctantly, some with fury. Retired staffers posted their own stories, emboldened now by the proof. Grady Lewis was one of us. One tweet read. They did to him what they did to dozens more, and we all stayed quiet. But it wasn't just social media heat. The story found its way to high places. Senators called for formal hearings on racial bias in pro sports employment. League owners were summoned to speak. The commissioner issued a stilted video statement, vowing a comprehensive audit of historical practices. But Shaq didn't stop there. He went further. He met with the mayor, then city council. He booked a night at the South District Arena, not for a game, not for a concert, but for something else entirely. He didn't call it a tribute. He called it a reckoning. On the night of the event, the arena buzzed not with the sound of fans chanting, but with a quiet tension, reverent, heavy, powerful. The Jumbotron didn't play hype reels. It displayed images of Grady over the years, sweeping floors, lining up equipment, clapping from behind the bench. For the first time, the crowd saw him the way Shaq always had, essential. Shaq walked onto the floor wearing a simple black jacket. No logos, no sponsors. The same kind Grady used to wear during late shifts in the tunnel. He stepped to the mic. This isn't a eulogy, he began. It's a correction. The crowd leaned in. Grady Lewis wasn't a background character. He wasn't a charity case. He wasn't just some guy in the locker room. He was a man who stood up when it cost him everything. And when the system tried to erase him, he chose dignity over bitterness. Silence over spectacle. But we don't have to be silent anymore. He turned, motioning to a massive black curtain. It dropped. Behind it stood a new wall, a permanent structure inside the arena, beside the Hall of Fame installations. The plaque read, Grady Lewis, 1986, the contract denied. 1987-2020, the years that built the foundation. This game was always bigger than basketball. Applause didn't come immediately. It didn't feel right. People stood instead, quietly, solemnly, like they were in the presence of something overdue. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of truth. Shaq stepped away from the mic. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked toward the skybox above the court, where Grady, frail but present, aided by two nurses, sat watching. Their eyes met. Grady nodded once. That was enough. No words, no fanfare, just recognition. Later that night, Shaq sat outside Grady's hospital room. The man had been wheeled in after the ceremony, tired but satisfied. Shaq placed the file, the original, on the nightstand beside the bed. You weren't forgotten, he said, almost to himself. They just never wanted to remember. Grady didn't respond. He didn't need to. His story had finally been told. And Shaq, the man the world knew for power and personality, had done the one thing more important than winning titles. He had used the spotlight to illuminate the shadows, sometimes, just as sounds like a crowd holding its breath. It was early morning when the call came. No panic in the nurse's voice, just quiet clarity. He passed peacefully. In his sleep. Around 3:17 a.m. Shaq didn't speak for several seconds. The sunlight hadn't yet touched the windows of his home. But the whole world felt paused. He'd known it was coming. The steady fade, the slowness in Grady's breathing. The way his eyes had begun to look past people, towards something softer farther. But still, the finality landed like a slow, deep breath being exhaled for the last time. He drove to the clinic in silence, his SUV gliding through half-awake streets. No radio, no calls, just memory. He thought about those first moments in the shelter. Grady curled up, diminished but not broken. Thought about the unraveling, the files, the meetings, the backlash. The firestorm Grady had never asked for, but endured. The nurses had already cleaned the room. A single sheet folded at the end of the bed. Grady's jacket, that old faded arena staff windbreaker, was draped carefully across the chair. On the nightstand sat the framed photo Shaq had left weeks ago. Grady, half smiling, holding a clipboard in the background of a championship celebration. Now he was in the foreground. Shaq reached out and touched the edge of the frame. You were never small, he said softly. 2 days later, the arena opened its doors. Not for a game. Not for a show. But for a man who until recently had no banner, no press clip, no highlight reel. The entire floor was cleared. No sponsors on the jumbotron. No vendors yelling from behind counters. Just rows of seats and a single podium at half court. And the people came. Not just fans. They came too, yes. Drawn by the story, by the strange gravity of a man they'd never seen before last month. But there were others. Former staffers, janitors, cooks, laundry workers, arena EMTs, bus drivers. Quiet people in quiet clothes, sitting in quiet rows. Dana Carlisle stood near the front, arms folded, head bowed. She'd helped organize the whole thing with Shaq, keeping it stripped of spectacle. There were no halftime dancers. No tribute montage blasted across 1,000 screens. Just one spotlight, fixed on the empty court. Shaq took the stage alone. He stood behind the mic, not dressed in his usual suits or TV-ready layers. Just a plain black shirt, no logos, no distractions. I won rings in this building, he began. Scored points, broke records. They used to call this place mine. He paused. Let the silence settle. But it was never mine. Not really. I was just the noise, the show, the surface, the real foundation. That was Grady Lewis. He looked around, eyes scanning the sea of faces. Some familiar, some forgotten, some finally seen. You didn't cheer for him. Most of you didn't even know his name, until recently. But if you ever loved this team, if you ever wore the jersey, if you ever left here smiling after a win, Grady had a hand in that. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, opened it, held it in both hands. This is the contract he never got, Shaq said. Back in 1986, pulled because he stood up against a policy that treated black players like baggage. They took away his shot, but they didn't take away his dignity. He looked up, voice steady. He never told anyone, never used it to shame or guilt. He just showed up, every day, and did the work. Because he believed in the game. Even when the game didn't believe in him. A hush rolled through the crowd, not heavy with mourning, but sharpened with clarity. Shaq folded the paper again, tucking it back into his pocket. Some people leave this earth with statues, others leave with whispers. But today we're changing that. He stepped away from the mic and turned toward the wall above the player tunnel. A black curtain fell. Behind it, a bronze plaque. The same size and elevation as the one bearing Shaq's own name. Just a few feet away. Grady Lewis, truth keeper. Foundation builder. The man who stood when it cost him everything. Etched underneath were the years of his life. And a quote he once said to Shaq in passing. Some people play for the crowd. Some just hold the floor steady. The entire arena stood. Not to clap. Not to shout. But to hold the silence. A deep, resonant pause filled the stadium. No announcers. No replays, just air. Still and full. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for attention, but demanded it anyway. A stillness made not of sadness, but reverence. Somewhere in the upper rows, a man took off his cap. Another held his hand over his chest. A child asked his mother who Grady was, and she leaned down to explain in a whisper. The stadium, for the first time in its long and noisy life, became a temple. Later, after the crowd had emptied and the lights dimmed, Shaq walked the court alone. He traced the three-point line with his eyes, looked up at the rafters and then at the bronze plaque. He whispered something to it.
Maybe it was thank you.
Maybe it was I'm sorry. Maybe it was both. Back in the clinic, Grady's things had already been boxed. The nurses kept his windbreaker, hanging it in the break room with a handwritten sign, in case someone forgets who kept us warm. Dana published one final piece. Legacy in bronze. The man who cleaned the floor and carried the game. It spread quietly but deeply. No media circus this time. Just truth passed from one honest hand to another. A week later, Shaq visited a high school on the south side, where Grady once mentored kids during off-seasons. The gym was worn down, the bleachers squeaked, but the court shone clean. He handed the principal a check, quietly, no camera. Then he walked out, not saying a word, just letting the echo of his footsteps fill the space where Grady once stood. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying leaves and dust down the sidewalk. Shaq stood beneath the sky, head tilted upward. For a long time, he didn't move. Because sometimes the greatest tribute isn't in noise or headlines. It's in the silence we choose to honor those who never asked for it, but always deserved it. Grady's name never left him. In the weeks after the tribute, Shaq kept his promises. The Grady Lewis plaque became a landmark inside the South District Arena, and Shaq made sure it was never just a backdrop. Every new player who joined the team was brought to it on day one. Every media tour paused there. Every youth team that came through read that inscription aloud, line by line. But it didn't stop at a plaque. From the bones of grief, Shaq built something stronger. The Grady Lewis Initiative was born out of a single belief. The people who hold up the world of sports, the staffers, the trainers, the drivers, the cooks, the laundry crews, deserve recognition, protection, and opportunity. Shaq put his money where his name was. He personally seeded the foundation with $25 million, refusing corporate sponsorship. They weren't there when he needed them. He'd told Dana during the press rollout. They don't get to buy their way into this. The initiative launched with 3 pillars: visibility, compensation, and legacy. Visibility meant storytelling, documentaries, podcast features, team-mandated tributes to their support staff during every season. For the first time, arena janitors had bios in game day programs. Training staff received game balls. Ushers were honored with service awards on the court, in front of packed crowds. Compensation meant equity. The foundation partnered with teams to implement a league-backed baseline wage for all non-player personnel. It wasn't charity. It was justice. And legacy meant career pipelines, scholarships for staffers' kids, training programs, mental health services, and retirement funds for the very people who'd been invisible for generations. Shaq didn't let it become about him. He barely spoke at the press conference. Dana did most of the talking, standing beside other staffers who'd come out of the shadows to tell their stories. But he showed up in other ways. One day, a custodian named Roy, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, opened his locker and found a handwritten letter inside. It was from Shaq. Just 6 words. I see you. Keep standing tall. Next to it was a check, enough to wipe out his debt and send his daughter to college. Another time, A retired equipment manager in Detroit was honored by his former team. They flew him in, walked him out mid-game, and unveiled a framed jersey, not of a player but of him, with the number 40 printed bold. 40 years of service. His eyes watered on live TV. And in a quiet gym in Atlanta, a high school janitor named Mr. Harlan, who'd never missed a day of work in 18 years, was called to the stage during a pep rally. The students chanted his name, and the principal handed him a promotion letter. The raise was significant. The health benefits, better than he'd ever had. When asked later how it happened, the principal just smiled. "Someone made a call," she said. Didn't leave a name. But everyone knew. Shaq didn't take interviews anymore when asked about Grady. His answer was always the same. "The story's already out there. My job's just to keep it moving." Still, late at night he'd find himself driving to the arena, when it was empty. No fans. No noise. Just the weight of memory and hardwood. He'd walk past the banners and step quietly to the wall where Grady's plaque hung. Same height. Same shine. No special lighting. No velvet ropes. Just bronze and truth. Sometimes he'd stand there in silence. Other times he'd talk out loud. "Miss you, old man," he'd whisper. "You changed more than you'll ever know." On one visit, he found a folded note at the base of the plaque. It was from a young locker room intern. "I didn't know him, but because of him, I know I matter here. Thank you." Shaq kept that note in his wallet. The world had moved on in many ways. Games were still played. Trophies still lifted. But things felt different, more grounded. Teams across the country began adopting the Grady Lewis model. Monthly recognition days, staff raises, mentorship programs. His name, once unknown even to those he served, was now spoken with reverence in press boxes and locker rooms alike. At Grady's memorial, which was kept small per his wishes, Shaq gave the eulogy. He stood under a low ceiling in a modest chapel. No cameras allowed, just friends, family, former colleagues, and a few players who'd come not because they were famous, but because they owed him more than words. Shaq didn't talk about the injustice that had defined Grady's past. He talked about the integrity that had defined his life. He didn't need a crowd, Shaq said. He didn't need a platform. He lived with honor when nobody was watching. And that's the kind of legacy that lasts longer than banners. After the service, Shaq stayed behind. He walked slowly to the front row, knelt by the casket, and placed something small beside it. Grady's old locker key. The same one the landlord had returned to Shaq all those weeks ago, when this journey had barely begun. He stood, turned, and walked out into the morning light. Years passed, and still, the initiative grew. One day, a new arena opened in Chicago. The Grady Lewis Initiative funded a memorial wing inside, a corridor lined with the names and faces of support staff from across league history. The final wall featured a quote. "Some heroes wear jerseys. Some pick them up off the floor."
No attribution.
It didn't need one, because the world finally knew who said it, and who lived it. If this story moved you, don't just remember Grady Lewis. Look for the Grady in your own world. Honor the unseen. Speak for the silenced. Stand up when it would be easier to sit down. Because justice isn't loud, it's consistent. And change doesn't start in headlines. It starts with who we choose to see.